You're tuned in to New Connection Radio, featuring new releases for conscious living. I'm your host, Vicki Thompson. Today I'd like to welcome to New Connection Radio Judith Pennington, who is the author of Your Psychic Soul, Embracing Your Sixth Sense. Judith, welcome to New Connection Radio.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm delighted to be with you.
We know your book. It's such a well-written book and such a warm book with interesting stories in it. And you start out and you talk about a health crisis that brought you in touch with your soul's essence. Can you share how this experience began your relationship with your psychic soul?
Sure. It was really a defining moment or moments in my life. I was, I guess, in my mid to early 20s and didn't believe in God or religion, hated Jesus. I had a few little issues with spirituality. And one day I began to develop a very terribly painful stabbing pain in my stomach, and it went on for about 3 weeks. I went to the doctor. The doctor said, did a examination, said, come back on Monday during my lunch hour and take these preparations. And so I proceeded to enjoy the weekend, never gave it another thought. But then on Monday when I left work, I realized that the doctor was using his lunch hour. So I started to worry a little bit, and I sent up a prayer and said, I don't know if there's a God or not, but if there is, please don't let anything happen to me because there's no one else to take care of my little girl. And before I got that sentence through my mind, a cold chill, the kind you feel when you're watching a horror movie, sweeps over you really fast. But at the tail end of that, the cold blossomed into this incredibly warm, pouring, and radiant light that just overtook my body and my mind and threw me into a kind of ecstasy, something I'd never felt anything like it before. And I remember looking down at my arms because it felt like the pores in my arms were opening up, but it looked the same. And then I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw that I was crying. I was just in this incredible sensations of bliss and joy, just caught up in this pouring light, which grew stronger and stronger and stronger. And then I realized that I was watching my body from behind my body and didn't really know who was driving the car. And then I had this sudden thought that this is what it feels like to die. And I just knew the truth of that. I knew that I was in a kind of in-between space, between dimensions. And this feeling went on. I wanted it to go on forever, but at some point, it was a timeless experience. At some point, I looked up and saw that my interstate exit was ahead. Later on, I timed this, and it was about a 15 to 20-minute experience. It felt like it was just moments, but I was just lost in it somehow in the time of it. And I felt my hand back on the steering wheel. I could suddenly feel my hands again, steered myself off the interstate, made preparations, and went to the doctor's office, and the doctor examined me and said, that medicine I gave you must have worked really well because there's nothing wrong now. And I just, kind of laughed and to myself and didn't say anything to him, but I knew that it was not his medicine that affected me. It was some incredible force, and for a long time I didn't know whether it was inside of us, this healing force, or whether it was something outside of us. But I was never the same again. This was not something I could doubt or deny. Something extraordinary had happened to me. I never forgot the feeling of that bliss and that joy. And I think from that moment on, my life was an unconscious search because, who do you tell about something like this? I didn't know anyone I could tell or talk to. So it was an unconscious search for some experience that would return me to that radiant, beautiful light and the feeling of being loved and held and unconditionally accepted and for something greater than I ever thought I was before, and now sensed on some deep level that that light was a part of me, and it was my work to find it again.
Well,
long answer to a short question, but
yeah, it sounds like you tapped into your soul. And how does Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, define the soul?
He actually, in a way, described what I experienced at that time. Many, many years later, I stumbled across Edgar Cayce, and in the course of writing this book, learned a whole lot more about what he said. And it was essentially that we do not possess a soul, that we are souls in this physical body, and that the soul, each of us, has a sixth sense, and that sixth sense is what connects us with a superconscious realm, which is what I experienced that day driving my car in that healing on the interstate, and that in that superconscious, it's a sea of light, as he called it, then there we are in touch with all wisdom and information in the universe, and it is what we can use both by being spiritualized by that energy itself, which is exactly what happened to me in those transformative moments, and also by virtue of the wisdom that we can pull down through the sixth sense into the body, soul, into the mind and spirit, and use on this earth. That in a way we're bringing heaven to earth and earth to heaven, and that is what evolves us. That is what makes us more than we were before. And in fact, that's what the whole book is about, is how to get to the state of mind where you are aware of yourself as a soul and can contact that information.
Well, on your journey, you were intuitively guided to read about research findings on EEGs, which explain how brainwave development can open up psychic abilities. And through that journey, you're now a world authority on EEGs. Can you explain how it works?
Sure. That was another source of direct guidance to the work of Anna Wise. I was in Virginia Beach writing a book, The Voice of the Soul, about my journey through inspired writing, which is what made me understand, ultimately, that we are all composed of light. And so I was on a trek, a scientific trek to understand how spirituality worked, and I was writing that book and thus guided intuitively to an interview with Anna Wise over at the ARE bookstore in a magazine called Common Boundary. I'd written for it before but hadn't seen it for many years. And there I came in contact with a scientific explanation of everything I'd just written in that first book. And I was just astonished. And essentially it is that as we make contact through inner awareness, through our realization that we are souls and can pull from the superconscious that intelligence and wisdom and information which pervades all things, but we still have to be in the right frame of mind to connect with it. Through that work of Anna Wise, I really began to understand that it's a universal journey, and it's the same journey made by everyone. It's a journey of mind expansion. As I said, we're all composed of light, and that includes the brain and consciousness. And so when you attain a meditative state of quiet stillness and inner calm, then what happens is that your consciousness is able to connect with your soul, which resides in the subconscious, and in that quiet space to be able to draw that information in. And as that happens, then the thinking conscious mind that we operate in every single day connects with the sensory awareness of lower and slower brainwave frequencies, which then connects with the subconscious, which is the repository of our creativity and insight and spiritual awareness, which then contacts the unconscious mind, which is the source of our intuition and our constant connection with that field of light that composes all things. And so when we go inside ourselves and connect with our subconscious soul, then we are unifying the mind, and we suddenly awaken from our self-separation and our lack of connection with other people and our spirit, and we awaken to who we really are. And, that's beautiful, radiant souls that are here to clear, clean, purify whatever does not serve us and become more of who we really are. And so that is what awakens the mind and ultimately evolves it from what's called the awakened mind pattern, that pattern of unity among the different levels of brainwave frequencies, to a still higher pattern that's called the evolved mind. And that is the state that I was in that day on the interstate, the evolved mind of enlightenment, transcendence, higher perspectives, oneness with Source, oneness with all that is. And then in the book, I'll just add this briefly, is I announce 2 other new brainwave patterns that I have found on the EEG screen. And I found them only in, so far, psychics and healers, a couple of people with high levels of attentional awareness, but really people in direct contact with Source, and that's the superconscious mind and universal awareness, and their progressions of the patterns that were found before. And so I tell some, as you pointed out, great stories about people and how they attain these states and access them and then maintain them. And what it ultimately boils down to is bringing heaven to earth and earth to heaven, just like Casey said. He was so absolutely spot on right about everything related to consciousness, meditation, the brain, the quantum sea of light. There was nothing that Casey said that has not been proved by science, and that's the power of my book, is that I give all the scientific backup for what Casey said. And, what so many people have directly experienced. The personal stories will ring bells for readers left and right because everybody's had some experience of intuitive awareness and insight that's changed their minds and brought them to higher levels of awareness.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Judith, for joining us today.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm delighted to have been here, and I appreciate your having me.
Join us next time on New Connection Radio, your source for conscious living.